Thanks for joining us. We'll be going live at 7 p.m. We'll be live in 2 minutes. Thanks for joining us. We'll be going live in 1 minute. Thanks for joining us tonight for Rich Condon and Civil War Pittsburgh. Good evening. Welcome to A Historian's Tale. My name is Paul Lawson, Pitt history guy, and my special guest tonight is Rich Condon, who runs the Civil War Pittsburgh website, as well as many other interesting things that you will find out about if you don't already know. This is my second monthly historians interview session. I am blessed to have many different friends who do history in many different ways. Last month, I interviewed Sherry Bailey, who runs the Juneteenth Festival in Tidewater, Virginia, old friend of mine from the Old Dominion State. And this month, I am interviewing Rich Condon. Rich graduated from North Hills High School and has a long-term bond with history that was nurtured by his dad and also by his mom, with many visits, especially to Gettysburg, but to many other places. And you'll hear about how, although Rich was a great fan of history in general and Civil War history in particular, it wasn't a straight path, as it isn't with many of us. And during that path, not only did he come back to history and to Civil War history in particular, but he's created his own brand on the side of his main work and not only Civil War bond, but a bond to the national parks that run, of course, Gettysburg, the central theme of his Civil War bond with his parents and his love of history. So, Rich,
Yeah.
tell us about what you remember of that first visit to your Gettysburg with your dad.
Well, first, I want to thank you for having me tonight. I'm not used to talking about myself and my personal journey connected to these stories, but I'm usually discussing someone else's story. So yeah, as you mentioned, I took like kind of a circuitous route to what I do today in 2021. And as you had shown, the picture of me, I think that was in front of the Reynolds Monument at Gettysburg. That was actually taken during my first trip to Gettysburg. In fact, let me think. I was about 11 or 12 years old, and I remember one night I was with my dad, and he's like, "Well, what do you think about going to Gettysburg?" Like, he knew I was interested in history at that point in my life. I'd been to Old Bedford Village in Bedford, Pennsylvania, and while it's not necessarily a historic site, it's kind of a recreation of a colonial village. It kind of sparked my interest in early American history, and so he asks me if I'm interested in Gettysburg, and I'm like, yeah, well, but I want to learn more about it first before we go there. So naturally, we go to John Eagle, and we rent Gettysburg, and this is before DVDs are a thing. So we get the double VHS tapes of Gettysburg, and we watch the entire thing the night before we take off for our trip. And the next day we go to Gettysburg. We basically are fitting as much as we can into about 24 hours. I don't even remember I think we stayed one night maybe. But we're trying to cram as much as we could as possible. Naturally, like a lot of people kind of gravitate toward the second day battlefield and the third day battlefield. We spent a little bit on the first day battlefield, though, and that's where that photo is taken of me in front of the Reynolds Monument. Of course, I had to get the Federal Army kepi, and we went to the Jenny Wade House, which you see there in the middle with me and my dad. And we kind of took the tour of that house and kind of did the battlefield on our own, and trying to visualize, knowing with what limited knowledge I had at the time, trying to visualize what did this place look like in July of 1863, and that's when I started to really get interested in it. And this love for history and Civil War history in particular would carry on from that point forward. And actually, that photo on the far right is me and my dad when we actually joined a conference, and I think it was 2017. We were joining the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields. They're doing this conference in Winchester, and we were kind of going up and down the Shenandoah Valley, and that photo is actually taken on Kernstown Battlefield. Which
is a privately owned battlefield, by the way, for those of you who don't. It's interesting. Yeah, there are a lot of national parks, but Kernstown is a private.
Right, and we're lucky enough to have Ted Alexander, the late Ted Alexander, and the late Ed Bars with us on this program. So it was out of this world. But yeah, so it goes to show that just that one trip to Gettysburg as a young boy kind of inspired what would become years of interest in trekking more battlefields outside of Adams County, Pennsylvania.
And for those of you who don't know, of course, Ed was a monster in the Civil War history field, author and tour guide. Ted, now you're talking my side, although I did never meet Ted. Ted was Mr. Antietam. He was the, I believe, chief park ranger, chief historian at Antietam.
I think he was chief historian, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, but as a national park employee. But Rich has another parent who was equally supportive of his love
Yes, I do have a mom, and that is her right there. Of course, after my dad took me to Gettysburg, I had to drag my mom into it too. And they
How was
both
that
kind
first time of dragging her, by the way? Did it
huh?
take much arm twisting? The first time did it take much arm twisting to get her to come with you that first time, or?
I don't think so. I think once she saw I was actually really interested in something, she was just happy I had an interest. Um, and she kind of nurtured that. So she's like, yeah, sure, let's go to Gettysburg. So honestly, from age 12 onward, we would try to go to Gettysburg at least one time a year. If it wasn't there, we usually trekked to, Harper's Ferry or Antietam, and kind of stuck around, Western Maryland, Eastern West Virginia, Southern Pennsylvania for a lot of our trips. But it had always been a place that, and a lot of families had this experience where, Gettysburg is this place that is hallowed ground. It's a place where, we recognize this horrible action that happened in July of 1863 and the history behind it and around it. But it also kind of carries a history for a lot of people on a personal level. They have, as strange as it sounds, happy memories in this place that's recognized for such a horrible event. And so I think that's how it was for us. And that picture there is actually, I think that might be the last time we were in Gettysburg. That was in 2019, I think. And that's actually in the Farnsworth House, because as often as we could, we'd always try to get a room in downtown Gettysburg, especially in the wintertime when you're trying to avoid tourist season. It's almost like you have the entire town to yourself.
So who is the other person that your mom is reading to in the picture?
That's my girlfriend, Kim. She's also equally as supportive.
That's awesome. So,
she enjoys this stuff nearly as much as I do.
So when you got serious with your girlfriend, that was a not hidden part of your central part of your character, that if she loves you, she's got to embrace the Civil War side of you as well, huh?
Yeah, and I'll admit, I've had plenty of girlfriends in the past who did not really, they couldn't keep up with it. But she lets me. I mean, hell, just a couple of months ago, she helped me build a bookshelf for 46 volumes of the War of the Rebellion official records. How many girlfriends are going to let you do that? So yeah, she's very supportive as well. And she enjoys this stuff. She enjoys going to different battlefields, and of course, even down here, I'm in South Carolina right now. There aren't any Antietam's or Gettysburgs or anything like that down here. It's a lot of skirmishes, smaller scale engagements, and a lot of it, today's on privately owned property, or there's just not a whole lot of, in some cases, documentation, and definitely not a lot of interpretation. So she is always for, a day trip going to some of these battlefields that aren't always widely interpreted or explored. So that says a lot too.
Excellent. So now let's rewind the clock and talk about your journey. So you've talked about how from junior high and high school, a lot of trips to battlefields with your mom and dad. So then you graduate high school, and what's on your mind?
Well, it wasn't. So when I graduated high school, I wasn't exactly sure what career path I wanted to take, as many young people don't really know, and some never figure out. So when I graduated, I initially went to community college of Allegheny County. Initially, I wanted to be a psych major. I just kind of was curious about how people's minds worked. And then it kind of went into music therapy, which also kind of fed into that psychology major a bit. But this is back in 2007, 2008. So this is before health insurance even covers music therapy. So back then they didn't think music actually helped people, I guess, on a large scale. But if you wanted to get into that field, you had to open up your own practice. And so I was like, well, I'm never going to have that kind of money. So I went to my other love, which is history. And, I loved, since I was 12 years old, I loved music and history equally. And trying to figure out how to turn either one into a full-time profession, actually making money doing what I love, was pretty difficult. And thankfully, I eventually did do that. It just, as I mentioned earlier, it took a long, circuitous route to actually get there.
Yeah, a lot of parents are told, it's like, tell your children to follow their heart, while at the same time they're like, okay, pay your bills.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to do.
It's easier to say follow your heart in some cases than another. But, yeah. So you started there, then you decided to take a break from CCAC before you finish studying, and you go down to Nashville.
Right. I did the next best thing, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna kind of put all this on hold and kind of figure out what I want to do. I'm pretty good at music. I had done session work in the Pittsburgh area for several years. And for anybody who doesn't know what a session musician is, it's basically a hired gun. So, I'd play with bands for fun, but a lot of what I did was also recording sessions or live session work, where I would be playing, typically guitar or bass, and getting paid for it. So I moved to Nashville, and I guess it was 2010. And I moved there with a band from Pittsburgh. And eventually what happened was I just kind of broke off and did my own thing. I was playing for random artists in the Nashville area, in the Middle Tennessee area, and trying to keep my head above water. I was touring as well. But, I kind of told myself, though, like, this is the time to do it while I'm still young, while I'm in my late teens, early 20s. Sure, I could go to school right now, but if I don't know exactly what I want to do, I don't want to be spending money on something that I don't know what I want to do. So I was doing this, and I knew I wanted to do it. I knew that if I were to do this when I'm in my, say, 40s or 50s, may not be as fruitful, and also I'd be kind of too far down the line to do much else. At least that was my logic at the time. And so anyway, I went for it, and I did that for a little while. It was a lot of fun. I wouldn't trade it for anything. But eventually I kind of looked at the timeline and, what's going to happen 10 years from now? Where am I going to be 10 years from now? Honestly, one of the things that really scared me was seeing some musicians on Broadway in Nashville who were, maybe in their 60s. And these people were amazing musicians, but they're basically scraping up pennies. And that scared the crap out of me.
and with no benefits, no health insurance, no life insurance.
Right, exactly. So I was thinking I started thinking like an adult a little bit, and I never thought I'd do that. And so one day, I thought about some of these battlefields in Middle Tennessee because in my off time I would visit places like. Obviously I lived in Nashville. That's a major battlefield. Unfortunately, much of it's lost to development. But I started visiting parts of Nashville battlefield, and just about 30 minutes south is Franklin battlefield. Boom. So, visiting Franklin, and also a lot of that battlefield is gone. A lot of it's lost to development. I mean, Middle Tennessee is one of the fastest growing places in the entire nation. Fortunately, there's a great organizations, I should say, that are doing preservation work on Franklin battlefield. One of them is the Battle of Franklin Trust. And that's who I ended up working for. I believe I started in, I want to say 2012. And so the way I did it, I actually basically did a cold email. I emailed the person who'd be my future boss, Eric Jacobson. Also, he's a huge music fanatic as well. So we connected on a bunch of different levels. And I think I heard back from him maybe 3 or 4 months later. And he calls me in for an interview, and then it was, it was all good from there. I think I started working for them part-time, just a couple of days a week, and quickly that bumped up to full-time. And that was my first experience working in the field of public history.
Excellent. And so that went for a while. And it's worth mentioning that, as you said, there were actually in 1864, in the winter of 1864, there was a series of two major battles and one near miss, shall we say, Spring Hill,
right?
Which was in a battle, and just south of Franklin, then the Battle of Franklin, which existed, and then the Siege of Nashville, which leads to the Union counterattack. Without getting into the details of that, basically, and Rich knows better than I, that the city of Nashville was actually offered to be one of the first Civil War battlefields that was preserved, along with Gettysburg, etc., but turned down the opportunity.
Franklin had an opportunity to become a preserved battlefield as well, but if you think of it this way, Franklin is one of the last nails in the coffin for the Army of Tennessee. It leaves a stain on the reputation of John Bell Hood. That's pretty contested for years after. And so years later, because this is also within barely 6 months of the war's end, it's a dark day in Confederate history. And who are they asking for money? Who are they asking to donate money for the preservation of a battlefield? Well, those same people. They don't want to remember that. At Franklin on November 30th, 1864, you had approximately 10,000 casualties in 5 hours. A majority of them are men of the Army of Tennessee. So about 7,500 men are lost in the Confederate ranks in 5 hours.
It's not even like Gettysburg, where we almost, if only. There's certainly was a small breakthrough in the center, but yeah, there was a lot of reserves behind it.
It looked hopeful for them for a second. And
literally a second, but there's there's large reserves behind it.
So and then Emerson Updike comes to the rescue. So if you think about it on that kind of long-term spectrum, a lot of people didn't want to contribute to the preservation of that field. Now, that's not to say that eventually it doesn't become, I think it was referred to as a Confederate shrine. Because you have Todd Carter, who's killed in his own. He's mortally wounded in his backyard and dies in his parlor, of his childhood home, which becomes a well-known story. But in the 20th century, especially, became kind of this Confederate shrine. And so when I was working there were people who still showed up at the site on Franklin battlefield who saw it as such. And of course, the Battle of Franklin Trust over the years has done a good job of kind of telling the full story of not just the Civil War, but Reconstruction too.
My older son and I visited there last month, and I highly recommend going. They do a great job, and they do a great tour telling that personal and much more complex story of the young man who dies in his parlor. Father wasn't supportive, and there's a whole complex biographies we won't go into, but it's worth going there and learning the stories of how life is not white or black. There's a lot of complexity, and there's a lot of personal stories that are worth learning.
Absolutely.
So you do Franklin, and then after Franklin, you decide to come back to the hometown.
Right. At that point, I think it was about 2015, 2016. I'd worked down there for a few years. Naturally, being a Pittsburgher, I was getting a little homesick. I always call Pittsburghers boomerangs because we eventually go back at some point, whether it's in a pine box or not. But I decided to go back to Pittsburgh, and of course, I needed my history fix. So that's when I show up at Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall Museum. Mike Krause, the curator, was kind enough to, kind of take me under his wing, and I became kind of I was volunteering, but I was doing a lot of work mostly with the books collection there. Of course, I did some interpretation as well, kind of like I did at Franklin. But I was doing a lot of the behind the scenes work too. And while I'm there is when I decide, let's now that I know what I want to do, I really enjoy doing this. Perhaps I can go ahead and continue school. I talked to different people about job opportunities in the field of history. Once I worked at Franklin, I saw that, a job in public history is not out of the question. And of course, one of the things that drove me back to going back to school, especially at Shepherd University in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, was the fact that
we're Shepherdstown. For those who don't know geography, where is Shepherdstown like 3 miles from?
Antietam, and it's pretty close to Harper's Ferry too.
Exactly.
So it's in one of my favorite places in the entire world. It's located beautifully. So as a kid, I mentioned these trips with my dad, for example, and my mom. My uncle actually lives in Charlestown, West Virginia, which is also close by. Mm-hmm. And so when we would go visit him, we would go through Shepherdstown, and I always thought the college campus was beautiful, and I was like, I would love to go here someday, and I did. So, I think in the summer of 2017, I ended up going back to school at Shepherd, now knowing kind of what I want to do. I want to work in the field of public history. As a kid growing up in Pennsylvania, for anybody who remembers watching kind of the Gettysburg battlefield walks on Pennsylvania Cable Network, that was definitely an influence on me as well.
Which they still play in July, every
right.
July.
And so seeing them do what they do, knowing they get paid to do it, I was like, that's what I want to do. So
with benefits.
With benefits. That's great. So I ended up going back to school, and that was kind of my goal, was to end up working for the Park Service after my college career.
So, but without waiting for the end of your college career, the Park Service opportunity comes up while you're still attending.
So while I'm down there, while I'm at Shepherd, I started working part-time for the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. I don't know if a lot of people know that, but my really good friend, Jake Wynn, was a programs director there. And I started working there. I think I was there for a short time. And then, around that same time, I was kind of casting out a net of applications for Park Service seasonal jobs. And of course, after I started working at the Civil War Medicine Museum, I get a call from my former supervisor at Flight 93 National Memorial, which is about an hour and a half from Pittsburgh. And so I was like, well, this might be a good opportunity to maybe go back to Pittsburgh for a little bit and work a job that I would still love with the National Park Service. And so in 2018 is when I accepted my first seasonal position with the NPS in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
Excellent. And so just a reminder for those of you who are watching, if you have any questions for Rich, enter them into the comments under YouTube, and they will come up, and Rich will be glad to answer them at the end of this. Thank you. So, Flight 93, and then from there, then you have at the seasonal, and seasonal means the warm months.
Yeah. So
then it gets to be the cold month.
Right. So I did, on average, your typical seasonal positions about 6, maybe 7 months if they can give you a little extension. But of course, like for anybody who can empathize with seasonal rangers, you understand that typically in the winter, most parks are slower. And so a lot of the seasonal staff are usually, you go into these positions understanding that you're going to be terminated at some point. It's not permanent. So, the winter's off. You got to keep yourself busy. Some people might, work at a restaurant for a few months until they go back the next season or something. As a historian, I was getting bored. This is actually something that I was talking about with Kim. In 2018, I'd worked my season. Toward the end of the season, I started thinking about, a lot of the Civil War history steeped in Pittsburgh. Allegheny Arsenal, Fort Pitt Foundry, the defenses of Pittsburgh, a whole bunch of stuff. And of course, soldiers and sailors with my previous experience there. I've learned a lot more. And so I thought it'd be a cool idea to do a Civil War tour of Pittsburgh. What if somebody did a tour of Lawrenceville, checked out the Arsenal site and maybe walked around Allegheny Cemetery? Well, then I thought to myself, who is going to want to take a tour with somebody they've never heard, some random person? Not many people are going to want to do that. And so that's when I kind of had this idea to tell as full a story I can about Pittsburgh's Civil War history, not just through a tour or public take it online as well. So in fact, it started in the winter of 2018, in December of 2018, with an Instagram account. I think one night I was sitting there, of course, bored because my season was over, and I started pulling up, old Civil War Pittsburgh photos, and I made an Instagram account. And then from there, went to Facebook, and then to Twitter, and then we eventually created a website/blog. And then, I think in January of 2019, I mentioned my friend Jake from the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. We had this idea to do a live broadcast from Gettysburg Battlefield. And, Gettysburg in January is cold as hell. There's no way that most normal people are going to want to trek through, 2 feet of snow on the battlefield to take a battlefield tour. So we thought, why don't we bring the tour to them? So me and Jake, and I think, if I remember right, Steve Fan was there, and a couple other folks. I think Dana Schoaf was there. We all decided.
Steve Fan was the Civil War Defenses of Washington Park Ranger, and Dana Schoaf is the runs the Civil War magazine.
Right. And so, Dana actually happens to be a Western Pennsylvanian as well. And so anyway, we all kind of put our heads together, and we came up with this virtual program from Gettysburg Battlefield. I think that was the very first virtual program we did. And from that point on, we've done many more. Which is kind of funny because this is before the age of COVID, when that became kind of the norm. And that grew into, speaking to Civil War roundtables, writing articles, and actually in, I think, December 2019, so 1 year later, we actually had an event in Pittsburgh, a large event in Pittsburgh, which I don't even remember how many people came out. But it was really cool. We actually had a Civil War camp set outside of the venue. We had a Civil War fife and drum band. Mike Kraus from Soldiers and Sailors joined us, and Diane Kleinfelter, who's the former curator at the Captain Thomas SBGAR post. We're all there, and we all.
Carnegie, PA, yes, one of the best.
Yes, yep.
One of the best preserved GAR posts in the country, and also you previously mentioned Soldiers and Sailors, where Micah's front works, and you volunteered. That was built in 1910 as a GAR meeting hall. So GAR, right, being Grand Army of the Republic, for those of you who aren't familiar, being the Union Veterans Association for the Civil War.
Yeah, and it turned out to be great. And honestly, there were people there who maybe didn't have kind of a deep understanding of our local history, who left with a lot more than they bargained for. We even had, I think, a Civil War themed dinner, Arsenal cider.
My wife and I came to the Civil War themed dinner. Thank you. Yeah.
Right. It was a lot of fun, and I saw from that this could be a really cool kind of community engagement. A lot of civic engagement can be involved with Civil War Pittsburgh. And so along with, for example, the Civil War Pittsburgh Facebook page, there's also a Civil War Pittsburgh community group where literally anybody can post whatever they want to regarding Pittsburgh's role in the American Civil War. Because I don't want it to just be me and whoever. I have people who volunteer to do work for Civil War Pittsburgh as well. Of course, I can't really afford to pay anybody. But this became a way for other people to engage each other about Pittsburgh Civil War history. And so, it's kind of become its own organic thing. It's kind of exciting.
So let's do a couple of highlight a few things. So, of course, Pittsburgh is not the site of a great Civil War battle, although we have the arsenal. But it almost becomes the Confederate cavalry. A few months before Gettysburg, get close. Confederate cavalry get as close as Morgantown, West Virginia. But in Pittsburgh itself, a few of these pictures here, Rich want to talk about, Avery College. So how does that story fit into Civil War Pittsburgh?
So Avery College was actually started by a man named Charles Avery, who's a reverend and also a staunch abolitionist. In Pittsburgh's, what used to be known as Allegheny City, now Pittsburgh's North Side, maybe 2 blocks back from East Ohio Street, was what would eventually become known as Avery College. And it was a college established for the education of African Americans, both male and female. But it's also strongly argued that it was a stop on the Underground Railroad, which isn't a crazy idea, because really there were quite a few stops in Western Pennsylvania along the Underground Railroad in the pre-war period. And of course, this ties into Pittsburgh's Civil War history, because, we ask ourselves, what's the leading cause of the American Civil War? The institution of slavery.
We hear a lot about colleges that were created for African Americans after the war,
right?
Hampton Institute and stuff. So, but this is 12 years before the war starts. So there ain't a lot of them, are there?
No, and this college is intact during the Civil War. In fact, George Vachon, who I believe was president of the college during the Civil War, he's an African American man who, he had this idea in the summer of 1863. When they built the Civil War defenses of Pittsburgh, there was a defense that was built on McGuire's Hill, which is near near Arlington Heights area. And it was, built in the African American community, and they're trying to figure out, what are we going to name this fort? Because of course, every fort has to have a name. And, Vachon recommended we should name this Fort Robert Smalls. And they did. And that fort actually stood in existence, I think, until at least the 1930s. So not only is it the school itself significant, but kind of the people who pass through its halls are significant. In the post-war period, it became an AME church, and it stood until the 1960s, when they were basically making way for I-279.
Cool. I'll try some short little another Pittsburgh tie. Alexander Hayes.
Alexander Hayes fighting Hayes. Huh?
Buried here, yeah.
He's buried in Allegheny Cemetery, one of my favorite sites in all of Pittsburgh.
And I will say, plug, I actually have a short video at his grave on Pitt History Guy. So if you want to learn a little bit more about him, you can hit there. And this is one of our GAR veterans, right?
Alexander Kelly. In fact, what's today? The 28th. Tomorrow, September 29th, is the anniversary of the Battle of Newmarket Heights, where Alexander Kelly, for his actions, is going to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. He's actually one of 14 African-American men who get the Medal of Honor for that one singular engagement. And he's buried in Pittsburgh.
And where is he buried?
I think it's St. Peter's Cemetery, I want to say. He lived out in the east end of Pittsburgh.
I've got to put them on my bucket list. I certainly know the story, but I've never visited, so I've got to go hit him. So here, the cemetery.
So that's an Allegheny Cemetery in the veterans lot, or the GAR lot. because there's kind of a mixture of Grand Army guys, and you have some Spanish American War guys, and actually there's a number of Confederates buried in that section too.
Wow.
But this picture was actually taken in October of 2019. That is a group from Philadelphia. It's the General George Meade Society of Philadelphia. So really, I think that was my first large-scale tour that I'd done with Civil War Pittsburgh. Andy Waskey had reached out to me actually, and said he had, I think it was about 52 people that were coming out from Philly, and they wanted to do a day-long tour of Civil War Pittsburgh, and so that's exactly what we did. We navigated a 52-passenger bus around the winding goat paths of Mount Washington, through Lawrenceville, through the north side, all over, and fit everything that we could in to about 7 hours.
Congratulations, and that must make you feel like it's starting to come to fruition.
That was pretty exciting. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So there's a shot from your Civil War dinner near Mount Oliver.
That was in Carrick, yeah.
Carrick, yeah. That my wife and I were at, and you even have merch.
We have some swag. On a small scale, we do have some of these Civil War Pittsburgh trucker hats. We do need to get some more because I've had some demand for them. We also have, we started printing Civil War Pittsburgh stickers as well. So, if anyone is ever interested in those, please just send us a message, and we'll be happy to send them out.
Excellent. And then so that brings us to where you are now.
Yeah, so I'm not in Pittsburgh right now. I am in Beaufort County, South Carolina. So, of course, after working at 1993, last year in 2020, or actually the start of the pandemic, I was offered a position at Reconstruction Era National Historical Park as a seasonal ranger. And so, Kim and I, we didn't have South Carolina on our radar at all. But, at that time, my dad, he passed away in June of 2019. And after he died, I still had his house. I had all of his things. And I didn't plan on staying in that house for a good reason. So I sold it. And Kim actually had sold her house in the west end of Pittsburgh, and we decided that we're gonna go ahead and try something new. We could probably use a fresh start, so we decided to come to Beaufort County. I'd never, like I said, thought about living in this area, but this subject matter was very interesting to me. Of course, being a Civil War nerd, I always ask myself these questions. Why was there a Civil War, and what were the consequences of it? And that led us into Reconstruction. So definitely very happy with our decision. Of course, you have the occasional potential hurricane. Yesterday, we had 3 earthquakes that happened up near Charleston. And it's pretty humid throughout the summers. But aside from that, we're very happy with our decision.
So to talk about that area, of course, not only Reconstruction area, why that's there, of course, is because that's where General Burnside lands in 62, I believe, beginning of 62.
Well, no, this starts in November of 61.
Okay.
John and Thomas Sherman, Sherman's leading about 12,000 U.S. troops, land in Port Royal Sound on Hilton Head Island, and then eventually Port Royal Island as well. And they're going to occupy this area basically from about eventually Edisto Island near Charleston all the way down to about Jacksonville area, Fernandina. And that would become the Department of the South, which they're going to basically hold that area throughout the rest of the war. But this kind of the bigger story is basically gives them an opportunity to launch what would become known as the Port Royal experiment, which is the what some people might refer to as a rehearsal for Reconstruction, because you had 10,000 plus formerly enslaved people in this area who are going to be the first formerly enslaved people in the American South, really, to start receiving an education, healthcare, working for wages, being able to have their own land to plant their roots on, etc. Everything changed within a matter of months for them. And this area basically, in a nutshell, becomes the perfect model for Reconstruction, the way it should work out across the rest of the American South.
And this is before the Emancipation Proclamation in January 1, 1863, before they're even emancipated, the enslaved people are emancipating themselves by escaping from their plantations and breaking through and getting through the Union lines and building an entire town, an entire economic system.
Right.
The first Union teachers coming down, reading and such, and schools for themselves. It's an amazing thing.
One of the first self-sustaining towns entirely made up of African Americans is Mitchellville on Hilton Head Island. It was a self-governing town with a compulsory education, for example, their own streets and houses. A lot of stuff's happening here in a short amount of time. But this is really where that story starts. People usually see Reconstruction as happening post Civil War, 1865, onward to about 1877. Here it lasts much longer.
Mm-hmm. And the as opposed to just the enslaved people being free, they're freeing themselves, and then they're going further. And you have units like the 1st South Carolina Volunteers under Thomas Wentworth Higginson,
right?
And then the 54th Mass, for those of you, the movie Glory, come down and land and get based out of that area, as I understand. So yeah, and then some are buried there, right?
Yeah, there's quite a few actually. In Beaufort National Cemetery, they're burying U.S. troops there as early as 1863. You had 15 U.S. Army hospitals set up to the town of Beaufort, and so all the guys who pass away, whether from disease or battlefield wounds, are going to be buried in that cemetery. And so, with the 54th Massachusetts being in this area throughout much of the Civil War, there's quite a few of them buried in the cemetery too.
So I say, if those of you up north or even locally, if you're in the Savannah, Charleston region, or you are interested in history and all these varied kinds of things, make that extra day to go over to Beaufort and go visit Rich and his fellow national park people.
Yeah, please come on down.
From that, and that's today. And then we want to talk about the final trip with your dad to Gettysburg.
Right. So, when my father passed away, there's, we had some talks and came to some agreements before he died. And so, one of them was where do you want to go after you die? Because you want to be cremated. Where do you want to be scattered? Things of that sort. Now, of course, because this is a national park, we didn't scatter him here. But we did take his remains this is on Little Round Top, and that's actually me and my mom. I think this is December of 2019. And this is the time he went to Gettysburg. He, of course, was scattered in places in other parts of Pennsylvania, but there are also places that, he wanted to go to one final time. For example, in early 2019, I'd taken a trip with Kim to Gettysburg, and it was a trip that my dad actually wanted to go on initially, but he's going through chemo treatments, and to where he wasn't really able to move around as well as he'd like. So this, in kind of a strange, bittersweet way, was that making up for that trip. So yeah.
Wow. And then during that trip.
Yeah, during that trip, you saw the picture earlier of my mom and Kim chatting in the Farnsworth house. My mom actually surprised me with, this book. I think it was written by Tim Smith, sold at the bookstore at the Farnsworth House. And so, this kind of marks the last time that that I actually got together with her. And hopefully we get to do that again soon, post pandemic or when things calm down. Ironically, she dates it on 12/3/19. That's actually my dad's birthday. So,
oh wow,
yeah, that's the last time I went there.
And was that just happening the date, or was it intentionally going
on?
No,
that was intentional. It just kind of worked out that way. But we meant to do that.
Wow, that's fantastic. So we talked about today. Now let's talk about tomorrow.
Yeah. So
metaphorically,
a couple of the things we're working on. I had a company reach out several months ago from the UK that actually does audio tours. So, of course, if I'm not there or a volunteer isn't there to do a physical tour of Pittsburgh Civil War sites, we're actually working on having an audio tour that people can download on their smartphones and get kind of different experiences throughout the city, including Allegheny Arsenal, or perhaps some of the defenses and other parts of Pittsburgh. And on top of that, really getting recognition for some of these sites is most important, because Pittsburgh is a rapidly growing city, and it's only getting crazier every day. I know, places like Lawrenceville do not look the way they did 5 years ago. It's crazy expensive, and everyone and their mom is trying to move there. So one of the things we're trying to do is make sure that some of these historically significant sites remain at least their stories remain intact, because at this point, Allegheny Arsenal doesn't exist anymore. In fact, there's I think it's called Arsenal 201 Apartments, sits where the gatehouse used to be. And I guarantee most of the people who live there have no idea what that means. But what we're trying to do is work with other entities in preserving those stories. So Civil War Trails, for example, we were in talks with them and having interpretive wayside markers brought to Western Pennsylvania to tell some of these stories. So it's not like those, the Pennsylvania Historical Commission's done great work with having, signs with maybe a paragraph or a few sentences about a certain period in history. Civil War Trail signs uses visuals as well. And so that's kind of our goal here, is to kind of engage the public as much as possible through words and imagery. So yeah, that's kind of what we have in the burner right now.
And then someone's graduating in less than a year.
Right. So we talked about Shepherd University. I've been working my butt off, not only, at my day job, but also, working. I'm actually taking 15 credit hours this fall, and I'll be taking 15 credit hours in the spring. I can sleep when I'm dead. And so I'm doing all of that on top of work, so I can, kind of get this done, graduate ideally by May of next year.
Fantastic. And then after that, hoping to circle back to the National Park Service.
Yes, that's the ultimate goal, is to keep doing that.
Excellent. So, given that, don't see any questions currently. Certainly, if you have any, feel free to submit them. And certainly, as this video will be posted, people will be watching this after the fact, and we'll certainly respond to any questions that are posted in Facebook or YouTube after the fact, as much as we can. So, quick about me. Why am I doing this? Yeah, like Rich, I'm a history nut, and I was born in Central Kentucky. My dad was born actually the first unincorporated village south of where Lincoln was born. So I was born as a Southerner who was raised to be a stars and bar Southerner who loved Lincoln, with no attempt to try to make that match. But I now live on this side of the Mason-Dixon line, but still, and have one ancestor in the 27th Kentucky Infantry. I know, Rich, do you have any ancestors?
All of mine are Cambria. Most of them, I think, are all Cambria County natives, all serving in Pennsylvania units during the Civil War.
Excellent.
So I had two great uncles who were in the wheat field at Gettysburg, but at the time didn't even know each other yet.
Yeah, my second great grandfather was like Union, Kentucky, and you know, not glorious, not Gettysburg, not even in West, because he was Western Theater. So
Right.
he gets wounded at Bean Station. So the glorious Battle of Bean Station. but lives a long life. Every time, of course, that we talk about soldiers and sailors in Antietam, you'll see me perk up because I actually do special events volunteering at Soldiers and Sailors, as Rich has done in the past. And by the way, if you want to see more about Rich, there's actually a video we did a few months ago. If you check the Soldiers and Sailors YouTube page, that features Rich as one of our main speakers. And I also volunteer on weekends at Antietam National Battlefield. And I grew up in Virginia Beach, so I spent 15 years as a naval engineer with aircraft carriers and large deck amphibs. And now that my kids are launched, I'm getting back into my history love, not just of history, but of history gaming, and several groups that I'm involved with. Proud dad of 3 grown children, as I mentioned, and a friend of cool people like Rich, who do history. Connections. Here's ways you can get in touch with Rich. His website, as he mentioned, and has a contact page on that website. You can reach him by Twitter. And you can reach me on my YouTube channel, on Facebook, on Board Game Geek. You can see, you can reach out to me there, on Discord, and by email. So with that, thank you, Rich, for being this month's history interviewee. And next month, we don't have a date set, but it'll probably be toward the end of the month. We will be interviewing Valinda Carroll, an old friend of mine who is much younger than me. But she actually is a specialist of paper conservation, and currently working with a private company called Infinity Art Conservation Enterprises, but in the past has worked for, you may have heard a few little places called the Smithsonian and Hampton University and Colonial Williamsburg. So she's a very expert in her field, and being able to hear her take on how she got involved in preserving history in a very unique way, because a lot of paper, as you know, one things we think is of course paper traditionally has acid in it, and paper will dissolve, and so if you don't do something to stabilize it, that history goes away. So with that, hope you can join us next month. And any last words, Rich?
No, I'm actually very much looking forward to her interview. As someone who collects old paper, I'd kind of like to hear her take on the preservation of those items. So I want to say thank you for having me. It's always fun to talk to you. And as Paula mentioned, if anybody has any questions at all, don't hesitate to reach out through any of the Civil War Pittsburgh avenues.
Excellent. Well, take care, everyone, and see you next month.
Thank you.